For most of the time our species has existed, nobody spoke a grammatical sentence. No words strung into brand new sentences about things that aren't even there, and yet hunts still got coordinated, danger still got flagged, skills still passed down from one generation to the next, all without a single verb. So the real question isn't just when language began, it's what filled every one of those hundreds of thousands of years before it, and the evidence says quite a lot. Full grammatical language is surprisingly recent. A 2025 study led by MIT linguist Shigeru Miyagawa traced the brain's capacity for language to at least 135,000 years ago. That's a floor. Every human population alive today has full linguistic capacity, so the capacity must predate even the earliest population split. Everyday use likely spread around 100,000 years ago. Fossil vocal tract reconstructions put full speech anatomy somewhere between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago, still a debated range. What separates full language from animal calls is grammar, combining sounds into new sentences describing things not even present. That's at most a few 100,000 years old, against the 2 million year span of our genus Homo sapiens roughly 300,000 years old. So what filled that gap? Probably several overlapping answers, running at once. Melody before. Meaning one answer traces all the way back to Darwin. In The Descent of Man, 1871, he proposed that early humans first used their voices for something closer to song than speech. Musical, emotional, tied to courtship, the same logic behind birdsong. Archaeologist Steven Mithen built on this in 2005. Before words, communication may have been what he calls holistic, manipulative, multimodal, musical, and mimetic. Holistic means a whole phrase carried a whole meaning, not separate, swappable words. Pitch, rhythm, and gesture together did the job a sentence does now. Mithen argues the system was especially well developed in Neanderthals, who, as it turns out, may have had the vocal hardware to pull it off. There's a living echo of the idea. Talk to a baby who doesn't understand a single word yet, and the pitch climbs, the rhythm slows and exaggerates, the melody carries the message. That pattern shows up in caregiver speech across unrelated languages and cultures, and infants consistently prefer it. A 2018 Harvard-led study found listeners in 60 countries could reliably tell, from musical shape alone, whether an unfamiliar song was meant for dancing, soothing a baby, or healing the sick. It's not settled science. Psychologist Steven Pinker dismissed music as auditory cheesecake, a pleasant byproduct of language rather than a step toward it. If Darwin and Mithen are right, meaning was carried through melody in whole musical phrases long before it was spoken in words, then there's danger. A lion doesn't wait for a sentence. Vervet monkeys studied since 1980 give acoustically distinct alarm calls for 3 predators: leopards, eagles, snakes. Researchers confirmed this wasn't coincidence by hiding speakers in the bush and playing back recordings with no predator in sight. The monkeys still responded correctly, call by call. The leopard call sends them up a tree, the eagle call sends them into cover, the snake call makes them check the ground. That's not language. There's no grammar, no new combinations. But it's sound mapped precisely and reliably to danger. If a monkey can do that, early humans with bigger brains and tighter social groups almost certainly had at least that much, probably layered with gesture and facial expression. Faces did a lot of this work too, and still do. Darwin argued in 1872 that emotional expressions weren't learned like words, but built in, the same wiring producing the same face in every human population because it once helped our ancestors survive. For nearly a century, that claim stayed contested. Many researchers assumed expressions were as culturally specific as language itself. In the late 1960s, psychologist Paul Ekman went looking for a culture untouched by film, television, or photographs of foreign faces. He found the Fore people of the Papua New Guinea highlands, then living a pre-literate, isolated existence. Using short scenarios, a death in the family, an approaching fight, a bad smell, he had them pick the matching face from a set of photos. They chose the same expressions an American would. Happiness, anger, sadness, disgust, surprise, fear. People who had never seen a Western face on a screen still read it correctly. Universality has limits, though. A later study of the isolated Trobriand islanders found their reading of a fear face didn't match the Western pattern at all. A reminder that even here, the picture is messier than Darwin's original claim. Before getting to human gesture theory specifically, it's worth looking at what our closest relatives already do with their hands. In 2014, primatologists Catherine Hobater and Richard Byrne filmed wild chimpanzees in Uganda's Budongo forest, logging more than 4,500 individual gestures. From that, they built the first real dictionary of ape gesture. 66 distinct signals, boiling down to 19 clear meanings, used consistently by different chimps in different situations. A specific gesture aimed at a specific individual meant roughly the same thing every time. One combination translates to something like groom me, another to follow me or move away. Here's the detail that matters most for this story. In a 2023 follow-up, researchers showed video clips of these same ape gestures to thousands of ordinary people online, with no training at all. The volunteers guessed the correct meaning far more often than chance would allow. Whatever that gestural system is, some trace of it, it seems, we never fully lost. Which points to gesture as a deeper root of all this. Anthropologist Gordon Hughes argued in 1973 that language may have started in the hands, not the mouth. Once our ancestors stood fully upright, their hands were free to point and mimic. There's a specific skill behind that theory worth pulling apart. Joint attention, the ability to follow someone's gaze or a pointed finger to whatever they're looking at, and understand they want you looking at it too. Psychologist Michael Tomasello has spent decades comparing this in apes and human children, and the gap is striking. Even chimpanzees raised alongside humans rarely point just to share something interesting. They point mainly to request things they want. Human infants, by contrast, are reliably pointing to share attention with someone else by around their first birthday, long before they can talk. Tomasello argues this, not vocabulary, not grammar, is the real cognitive foundation communication needed before words could ever work. We also know gesture alone can carry a complete language, because it still does. Sign languages built by deaf communities have every property of spoken language: structure, grammar, the ability to say something that's never been said before. They just don't use sound to do it. The hardware for speech. But speech is also a physical act, and at some point the body had to catch up. In 1983, archaeologists at Kabara Cave in Israel uncovered a roughly 60,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton with an intact hyoid bone, the small bone that anchors the tongue and voice box, letting it move with the independence fine speech requires. Described in 1989, the bone was nearly identical to a modern human's, not the more ape-like shape some researchers had expected. A 2013 study went further, examining the bone's internal structure and finding loading patterns that matched active speech use, not just its outer shape. Genetics tells a similar story. Neanderthals carried the exact same two mutations in a gene called FOXP2 that modern humans carry. FOXP2's importance became clear through a British family, several generations of whom share a rare damaged copy of it. They struggle both with grammar and with the precise, rapid mouth and jaw movements ordinary speech requires. None of this proves Neanderthals held conversations. It suggests the physical hardware for speech was already in place in the ancestor we shared with them. A split researchers currently date anywhere from roughly 400,000 to over 800,000 years ago, depending on the method used. The hardware, it seems, showed up long before we can confirm the words did. Why the volume went up? So why crank up the sound eventually? One answer, from anthropologist Robin Dunbar: primates bond by grooming, picking through fur, one-on-one, for hours at a time, releasing endorphins that build trust between the groomer and the groomed. It works, but it doesn't scale. Human social groups naturally settle around 150 people, a figure now called Dunbar's number. It comes from a real pattern across primate species. The bigger a species' neocortex is relative to the rest of its brain, the bigger the social group it can keep track of. Humans sit right on that line, capping out around 150, and keeping up with all of them through grooming alone would eat up nearly half of every day. Talking is grooming at scale. Dunbar found casual conversation groups still cluster around 4 people, 1 talking, 3 listening, the same 1-to-3 ratio you'd get from grooming 3 separate partners in turn. We didn't abandon grooming, we just learned to do it with our voices instead of our hands, reaching several people at once instead of one. Close. So the hunts got coordinated, the danger got flagged, the skills passed down, generation after generation, without a single verb. A shift in stance, a raised hand, a glance held just long enough to be understood, and followed without being told to. None of it is language, not in the strict sense, no grammar, no sentences, nothing you'd technically call words. But all of it is real communication, tested and passed down for far longer than words have existed. That system is older than our species, older than our genus. It's built from melody, faces, hands, and a few million years of paying very close attention to each other, layered one small addition at a time, until eventually one of those additions was a word.